Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create the Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. Quite a few items in and around the tabernacle are not that hard to understand, they make sense. There are a few, however, that are challenging. What is the so-called showbread or bread of the presence for? And what is the meaning of the lampstand with its elaborate artwork of almond blossoms and petals? In this issue, those are the questions I'm going for. The first thing an Israelite coming to the tabernacle would have seen is a fence surrounding the courtyard. It's the first indication of several that God cannot be approached casually or carelessly, that access is limited and that caution and proper preparations are called for. On entering the courtyard, one would see three objects. First, the altar of burnt offering, which indicates the need for atonement. Not an easy concept. I tried to deal with this about a year ago. And second, there is a basin of bronze filled with water. Before the priest could do anything, they had to go there to wash their hands and their feet. This symbolizes the need for purity when approaching God. And of course, there's the tent of meeting itself, the actual sanctuary, which would be visible behind the altar and the basin. We are not talking about a big structure. The courtyard measured approximately 50 by 100 meters. The tent itself was 5 by 15 meters. The tent's foremost significance is that it demonstrates God's presence in the midst of Israel. It's perhaps not so much God's home or dwelling place as it is the place where he meets with his people. 135 times the Torah speaks of the tent of meeting. The actual tent consisted of two compartments separated by a curtain or veil, the holy place and the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. And again, we get the point that God is not easily accessible yet. Ordinary Israelites were not allowed to enter the tent at all. Only priests could go in. And even they were not allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest could do this, and that only once a year on the Day of Atonement. The increasing holiness is also symbolized by the materials used. Whereas outside, all metal used is either silver or bronze. Inside the tent, everything other than the tent itself is made or covered with gold. So what is inside the tent? Upon entering, the priest would see the lampstand on the left and the table with the bread of the presence on his right. I will return to these items. Straight ahead, he would see the altar of incense and the veil that separated the two compartments. Clearly, the way into God's presence was not open or free, and not even the priest qualified for entrance without offering incense as a fragrance pleasing to the Lord. After all, it's one thing to remove sin and its offense, but yet another thing to make something or someone pleasing to God. Because of the veil, the remaining item, the Ark of the Covenant, remained invisible. It contained the two stone tablets with the 10 Commandments, and the ark was covered with a lid made of solid gold, which was of one piece with the two cherubim. The lid is often referred to as the mercy seat. The Hebrew word kaporet derives from the verb kiper, which means to atone. It is the place where, on the Day of Atonement, blood was sprinkled to make atonement. It was from between the two cherubim that God would speak with Moses. The Ark of the Covenant and its lid therefore represent the very presence of God in this place, which makes it the most important object in the entire sanctuary. Perhaps for this reason, although it was reached last by anyone entering, the text of Exodus chapter 25 through 31, where the instructions for making the tabernacle are given, puts the Ark of the Covenant in first place. Noticeably and highly unusual in the ancient world, there was no image of the deity in the sanctuary. Of course, no image could do God justice, and he could not be manipulated, as implied by a visible and physical image of deity. God's presence was real, but it was invisible. It may well be that we are to think of the ark as part of his throne, the footstool of his throne. In fact, it is described in these terms in 1 Chronicles 28, and the Old Testament speaks of God as enthroned on or above the cherubim. The cherubim were guardians upholding and supporting the throne. The ark as footstool also explains the presence of the testimony in the form of the 2 stone tablets in the ark. In the ancient world, it was common to preserve the text of important treaties underneath the feet of a god. And so the tabernacle was probably not so much God's dwelling place, but it was the place where uniquely heaven and earth met. Back then, the only such place on earth. The remaining 2 items, lampstand and table with bread, are not explained, so we need to proceed with caution. I offer a reflection or meditation on their possible meaning more than a straightforward exegesis. Now, one function of the lampstand is of course eminently practical. The inside of the tent was a dark place. For a priest to do anything there, light might be a necessity, but likely more is intended. I see 4 probable allusions. First, the lampstand is a symbol of Israel. In Zechariah 4, the lampstand represents Israel. In Revelation 1, the 7 lampstands there represent 7 churches. Both references are much later than Exodus, of course, but nevertheless suggest that the lampstand in the tabernacle may well be a symbol of Israel. Much like the church in the New Testament, it has its place in the presence of God. And it is called to be, number 2, a light of the world. Now, important, this light does not originate with Israel. It is the bearer of light, but does not itself create the light. Notice that the lamps need oil to give light. In Zechariah 4, the oil for the lampstand is explicitly linked with the Spirit of God, and the oil that's needed flows from 2 olive trees representing Zerubbabel, the governor, and Joshua, the high priest, the 2 anointed of the Lord. Whether church or Israel, without this Spirit or this presence, there is no light. And then we have 3, the light of life. In Scripture, light and life are at times connected. The light of life is a known expression used. After all, a flame is a fitting image of human life, just as extinguishing a flame is an image for death. All the hardware is still there, whether lamp or body, but the life is gone. And then the 4th allusion is the tree of life. The lampstand with its 7 arms or branches and the almond flowers looks like a stylized tree, and it probably represents the tree of life. As such, it would fittingly combine the ideas of light and life, and it would also make clear that true life can only be obtained from the God of Israel. The golden table with its 12 loaves of bread is likewise not explained. Literally, the text speaks of the bread of the face, where face often signifies presence. But whose presence is meant? The 12 loaves obviously represent the 12 tribes of Israel, but according to Exodus, they are to set this bread on the table before me, says God, literally, to my face. Therefore, it must be the presence of God that is in mind. Is this food presented to God? Or is it a reminder that Israel depends on God's provision? Are we to think of that line in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread"? The first option, food presented to God, is unlikely. God does not need food and drink. He gives these things, and the bread is eaten by the priests, not by God. The second option is more likely. The loaves express Israel's dependence, much like we express it in the line from the Lord's Prayer. Something else may be intended as well, especially when we include the plates, dishes, bowls, and flagons on the table in our deliberations. It is sometimes speculated that these vessels had a function in the preparation of the bread, although this is not made clear in the text. But it does state that some of them are for incense, and in addition some are to pour drink offerings. Even though there are no instructions for any drink offerings in the holy place. Regarding the altar of incense, this is even explicitly prohibited in Exodus 30. The image that emerges is that of a table set. Someone is home. There is food and drink on the table. Perhaps it expresses God's hospitality and his openness for fellowship with his people, represented by the priests who will eat the bread and their portions of the sacrifices in God's presence. Come and eat, everything is prepared. This encounter with God is the true purpose of the tabernacle and the only way to life, and it still is.
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments.